Well, good morning from Mission Control Houston, and welcome to our live coverage of Dragon release here on NASA TV. Treating you now to this scintillating view of the SpaceX Dragon vehicle perched at the end of the Canadarm2 robotic arm in the International Space Station right now, while the vehicle flies just a little over 250 statute miles over planet Earth. The Dragon's set and ready to go. The vehicle's packed with just about 4,100 pounds of cargo that's going to be returned back down to Earth in under 6 hours from now when Dragon makes a parachute-assisted splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. But for now, we're counting down to the release from the robotic arm, coming up in just under half an hour from now. The team here in Mission Control Houston monitoring and actually giving the command to release Dragon for the first time ever today. The Orbit 1 team here inside of Mission Control Houston at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Vincent LaCourte's leading the team right now this morning. He's on the right there in the gray suit. Just above him, Leslie Ringo is going to serve as this morning's Capcom, so you'll be hearing her speaking with the crew members on board. And again, things a little bit different this time around. The ground controllers, the robotics controllers here in Houston, actually going to send the command to the robotic arm to release Dragon. This, in the past, always been a crew-commanded operation, but the teams down here on the ground taking a turn at it this time around. However, on board the International Space Station, the Expedition 54 flight engineers Joe Acaba and Scott Tingle standing by in the space station's cupola monitoring and available in a backup role if necessary.
Robotics operations will be commanded from the ground as M1, and the crew will be commanding Dragon as crew M2. Robo is primed for all robotics commanding, and Houston will also command ISS attitude for release. Robo is also primed for failure recovery unless noted in the procedures. Maker, you'll be primed for drift out and clearance monitoring, commanding Dragon departure, and failure recovery noted in the procedures. Robo and M2 will be communicating on space to ground during the release sequence. Ground M1 will be calling actions as they are performed. M2 is expected to perform verifications, monitor and call clearances, and report anything off nominal. Any questions so far? Okay, continuing with the review of 1.602 Step 3 coordination. 3 minutes prior to the release window opening, MCC Houston will load CCDB4 and inhibit thrusters. Ground M1 will command the SSRMS into mode and load the release command. When the release window opens, we will command the trigger to start the sequence. This is when crew M2 will be in Step 3 of 1.602. You will verify carriage D-ridge and snare open on the Monitor 2 MSS effector overlay, at which point you're monitoring for drift out. When either M1 or M2 verifies grapple fixture pin has exited the lee, Ground M1 will proceed with SSRMS back away. Again, M2 will be monitoring clearance and making appropriate clearance calls on space to ground. Also note that Ground M1 will switch to course rates once the arm is 1.5 meters clear of Dragon. Ground M1 will make a call when SSRMS backaway is complete. If failure prevents release or backaway of the SSRMS, Ground M1 will initiate hot backup and complete release and backaway to 4.5 meters. For video failures on the main RWS, you may relocate to the alternate RWS with the CCP or stay and monitor from the cupola windows. When crew M2 has visually verified 4.5 meters of clearance, you may proceed with Step 4 of 1.602 departure commanding. This step should be performed even in the event of a failure that prevents communication with MCC Houston or the ability of Ground M1 to back off the SSRMS. Any questions on that?
Negative.
Okay, finally, a few reminders. Again, Ground M1 will be talking to you on space to ground during the release sequence. You are not responsible for sending any robotics-related commands, even in failure scenarios. And I'm going to have one caveat to that in just a second. Caution that if you go to the hot backup RWS and it is active, the hand controllers and capture release switch will be hot. If we lose video on the ground, we will be backing away the SSRMS on your call that the pin has exited the lee and the Dragon is moving away from the arm. In that scenario, again, we need you to make distance calls, and this is the one time when we might need you to do something off nominal, which is if there's unexpected motion of the arm, you're primed for safing the SSRMS. That's just for the loss of video. If drift out motion is off nominal, Dragon depart in step 4 of 1.602 may be executed as soon as positive clearance is verified between Dragon and the SSRMS. Any questions?
Negative.
And so just now you were listening to a briefing from the robotics officer here in Houston, letting the crew know all of the steps coming up. Again, we're under 30 minutes away from the planned release of the SpaceX Dragon vehicle. The release window will actually open up right at 3:58 a.m. Central Time, 4:58 a.m. Eastern. And that's the exact moment that the robo here in Houston's planning to send the command to begin the release of Dragon. It takes a couple of moments for the snares to retract and for Dragon to actually be released, but we should see it come shortly after that command is given. Once Dragon is out of the grasp of the robotic arm, it'll slowly just float in place while the arm is backed away into a safe distance. Dragon will then execute a series of burns to take it away from the International Space Station, eventually leaving 2 different checkpoints, the keep out sphere and then the approach ellipsoid, basically just distances around the International Space Station, marking different rules that all visiting spacecraft have to follow when they're in that kind of close proximity to the orbiting laboratory. And then just a couple of hours after the release, Dragon will execute a deorbit burn. The unpressurized section of the vehicle, the trunk, if you will detach and burn up in the atmosphere. And then the capsule portion, the top, which has about 4,100 pounds of cargo packed away inside, will plummet through the Earth's atmosphere, eventually coming under parachutes and then landing in the Pacific Ocean. Teams from SpaceX will pick up the vehicle out of the water and then via boat bring it back to the sunny metropolis that is Long Beach, California, where some of the cargo will be removed immediately for return to NASA and various researchers around the country. And then Dragon itself will then get safed, and the rest of the cargo along with it will head over to SpaceX's test facility in McGregor, Texas.
And Houston station, Dragon departure review complete.
Okay, we copy complete. And I have some words for you regarding the Dark Monitor 3. We've looked into it, and currently at this time we do not see any need for that. And so the plan is we'll troubleshoot after release.
Okay, copy that. Thank you.
And the release and eventual return is, of course, just the final stage of SpaceX's mission, resupply mission to the International Space Station. It all began back in December when we were still in the year 2017 when Dragon lifted off atop a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. Again, that was on December 15th. The vehicle, all told, was packed with about 4,800 pounds of supplies and scientific cargo, and then it arrived at the station 2 days after launch, getting grappled by the crew on board using the robotic arm, capturing the vehicle, eventually attaching it to the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module, where the hatch was open that very same day, and the crew began working fast and furious over the next couple of weeks to execute a lot of the science on board, unload all of the cargo that's now staying on the station, execute a number of those science experiments that are also coming home, and packing it full of any other vehicle hardware, other items that are going to be coming home to Earth today. And getting confirmation right now, Dragon is in free drift, and when we see the release, again, everything will move very slowly, very deliberately, not a rambunctious operation by any stretch. You'll see Dragon get released, and the arm will slowly back away, and then Dragon, almost appearing to be in slow motion, will execute a series of burns to begin flying away from the International Space Station. Just a reminder, these two vehicles are traveling at over 17,000 miles an hour right now as they orbit the planet. And SpaceX will eventually slow all the way down for that parachute-assisted landing in the Pacific. But for now, still poised there at the end of the robotic arm. Again, if you're just now tuning in, the capture or the release window does open in just about 16 minutes from now. Expected at 3:58 a.m. Central, 4:58 a.m. Eastern Time. And that's when the window opens and when the command is expected to be given. And again, today's operation a bit outside the norm. The command to release Dragon actually coming from here in Houston. Typically, this is a crew-commanded event. But as they've done with more and more operations over time, seeing what the ground can control to free up some crew time. However, today, Expedition 54 flight engineers Joe Acaba and Scott Tingle standing by in the cupola module in a backup role, also monitoring the vehicle's departure. And again, Dragon today set to bring home about 4,100 pounds of cargo back down to Earth. In the pressurized section, the capsule, it's broken down in the same categories as the cargo that was delivered to the International Space Station: crew supplies, science investigations, spacewalk equipment, vehicle hardware, and computer resources. The lion's share of that pressurized stuff today is the science investigations. Over 2,000 pounds of science hardware and samples making the trip home. SpaceX's Dragon is the only resupply vehicle currently capable of returning large amounts of hardware. All the other resupply craft, including orbital ATK Cygnus and the various resupply vehicles from the international partners, all make destructive reentry, so burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. So SpaceX is Dragon a critical part of the science that takes part on board the International Space Station for those that need to come back down to Earth. And inside, again, about 2,000 pounds. So all told, about 4,078 pounds of cargo returning to Earth today. In the trunk section, the unpressurized cargo will have about 1,200 pounds, and that's payload that ultimately gets disposed of. So right before that reentry occurs, the Dragon will essentially split in half, with that top half, the capsule portion actually surviving the reentry, and then the bottom portion, the trunk or the service module, will burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. And Flight Director Vincent LaCourte just now pulled the teams here in Mission Control Houston, getting a go from all consoles. And so for now, Houston is go for departure. A number of the studies that are going to be returning on Dragon today are actually experiments that the vehicle also delivered. Among them, technological and biological studies running the gamut of all of the different disciplines of research taking place on board the International Space Station. Just a couple of highlights. One of them, the Made in Space fiber optics payload from the commercial company Made in Space that was sponsored by the Center for the Advancement of Science and Space CASIS, who manages the U.S. National Laboratory on board the station. Was a manufacturing payload that was on board for the last couple of weeks. That investigation actually looking at manufacturing fiber optic cable in microgravity. Research has indicated that actually doing this manufacturing in that microgravity environment could produce a much better optical quality cable than the ones that we're producing down here on Earth. And so results from the investigation, once they unpack it down here on the ground after its return, could ultimately lead to higher quality fiber optic cable, which could find its way into products not only into space, but almost more importantly down here on Earth. A number of samples from a plant growth study, also known as Apex 5, that was studying a stress reaction in plants that occurs when they experience reduced oxygen availability, something known as hypoxia, something that actually happens during times of soil flooding. These natural events can be sensed by the plant and lead to changes in their growth and development, mainly to aid in their survival, or in extreme cases actually can lead to losses or even the death of the plant. So these experiments hoping to provide a target for scientists to engineer the plants, manipulate them to make them more tolerant of low oxygen conditions. And so that could not only, again, have some impacts in space with growing these plants in a different environment, but also contribute to crops here on Earth that have those kind of difficulties with things like soil flooding. And then a couple of mice from NASA's Rodent Research 6 study going to be returning live down to Earth, so getting the ride down in Dragon today. This investigation, which was conducted jointly again with the U.S. National Lab assets, evaluated a new drug delivery device for administering continuous low doses. So very low doses through a continuous fashion, which could actually help counteract muscle wasting. and prevent the need for frequent drug administration. Those that follow spaceflight know that bone loss and muscle loss definitely an area of concern, which astronauts tend to combat through a variety of different countermeasures, primarily working out about 2.5 hours every day, but also through diet or different medications if necessary. This rodent research study actually studying a tiny capsule that was implanted underneath the skin that can deliver that constant low dose of a drug. It's actually going through a channel as narrow as 1/50,000th the width of a human hair, so very small scales. And then the drug that they were testing is a common therapy drug for asthma inhalers and other lung diseases. This low dose delivery could help avoid some of the side effects of taking high doses over long term, something that we would have to track very carefully. And astronauts and crew members, not only on long duration missions right now on board the space station, but feasibly they're theoretically in the future. When we start sending astronauts well beyond low Earth orbit on longer and longer missions. Something that we're preparing for now by doing this type of research with our crew members on board the International Space Station. Again, those just a couple of quick highlights. Over 2,000 pounds of science hardware making the trip down in Dragon today. For now, though, we're about 6.5 minutes away from the planned release of Dragon, so we'll continue to follow along. We should have good sunlight, good lighting conditions for this release, and hopefully get some spectacular views as the Dragon flies away from the station. And we are just about 4.5 minutes now away from the planned release of SpaceX's Dragon. And that release command should come at about 3:58 a.m. Central Time, 4:58 a.m. Eastern. The command will be given, the snares will slowly retract, and Dragon will be released from the robotic arm. And then the robotics controllers will slowly back the arm away from Dragon while it stays in this free drift mode. And then once the arm is at a safe distance, typically about a minute after release, Dragon will execute 2 departure burns to take it out of the neighborhood of the International Space Station, just gradually opening the gap between it and the station.
Station Houston on 2, go for Dragon departure on time. Perform step 324 in 1.602, Dragon release and departure monitoring.
Station copies, and we got it in work.
Just as a reminder, today's release being ground commanded from here in Mission Control Houston. On board the station, flight engineers Joe Acaba and Scott Tingle standing by in the station's cupola to monitor and also provide any backup if necessary. But for now, we are 2 minutes 20 seconds away from the planned release.
Station Houston on 2, ISS thrusters inhibited and ground M1 is go for release at 9:58.
Station copies.
And we're now just 1 minute away. Should hear the call from our robotics officer when the release has been commanded. Again, coming up in just about a minute.
Station Houston, stand by for release. Proceeding with release. Release commanded.
And so the release command has been given. Now we just wait for the snares to retract.
Snares open, begin monitoring for drift out.
And release. You can see the gap slowly opening, so the release coming right on time, 3:58 a.m. Central Time, 4:58 a.m. Eastern, with the station flying about 260 statute miles over the Earth, just to the south of Australia. So again, Dragon released from the robotic arm. Shortly, the arm itself will be commanded to move away from Dragon, and after about a minute, Dragon will begin executing 2 departure burns. This a view right down the barrel of the robotic arm, looking at the docking target on Dragon.
Has exited the lee. Go for back away.
We copy. Back off in progress.
Now the arm commanded its backing away from Dragon, which remains in this free drift. Getting a good view of the capsule portion of SpaceX's Dragon.
Dragon depart commanded.
Copy.
And the first departure burn has been commanded. This will just start opening the gap between Dragon and the station, sending the vehicle away from the orbiting laboratory. Getting confirmation, good departure burn number 1. That's just a quick 8-second firing of the thrusters.
Burn 1 is complete. Departure burn 2 in approximately 1 minute. Monitor per step 5 in 1.602.
Being work.
Station Houston, back away complete.
Copy.
And departure burn number 2 underway.
Station Houston on 2. Departure burn 2 is complete. Departure burn 3 in approximately 7 minutes. Monitor per step 6 in 1.602.
Station step 6 in work.
And so 2 departure burns in the book, 1 more to go. As SpaceX's Dragon continues to fly away now from the International Space Station, where it's resided for the last several weeks.
Station Houston on 2, ISS thrusters enabled.
Station copies, thank you.
Pretty dramatic view of Dragon as you can see the Earth's slowly beginning to be shrouded in darkness, the Terminator line about to cross underneath the spacecraft as it flies away. Everything continuing to go smoothly, Dragon still flying away from the station. It'll eventually get outside of what's known as the Keep Out Sphere. It's a sphere with a radius of about 200 meters that just dictates the rules that are in place for trajectories for visiting spacecraft when they're that close to the station. And then following that, it'll get a little bit further and eventually get out of what's known as the approach ellipsoid. Third burn coming up shortly. First two went very smoothly. An on-time release, again, that release at 3:58 a.m. Central Time, 4:58 a.m. Eastern.
Station Houston on 2, departure burn 3 is complete. Dragon is outside the keep-out sphere.
And station copies. Looking good.
And you just heard the call. Dragon's third and final departure burn done successfully. It's now out of the keep-out sphere. The vehicle actually over 300 meters away now from the space station. We'll stick with it for just a little while longer until it's outside of that approach ellipsoid, and then it will be well on its way to returning back down to Earth. Just a couple of hours from now, Dragon will actually execute its deorbit burn. That'll be at 8:43 a.m. Central Time, 9:43 a.m. Eastern, and that ultimately sets it up for a splashdown in the Pacific. That splashdown is supposed to occur right around 10:36 a.m. Again, Dragon will splash down in the Pacific, where recovery forces will move in and retrieve the capsule and move it and its just about 4,100 pounds of science supplies and vehicle hardware into port, where some of that science will immediately get offloaded for return to folks here at NASA and also researchers around the country, while the rest of the vehicle and the cargo eventually makes its way to McGregor, Texas for final processing and final distribution. But everything continuing to go smoothly with this morning's operation. Dragon still slowly flying away from the station, already about 560 meters away and opening.
Houston Station, we're seeing step 6 complete.
Have a copy.
And Houston from station, congratulations on a nice job, and go Team Robo. Nice work.
Thank you much, and we really appreciate your help with these ops.
And again, we're just standing by until we confirm Dragon is out of the approach ellipsoid. It's that one final checkpoint until the vehicle's well on its way.
And Station Houston on 2, Dragon is outside the approach ellipsoid on a safe 24-hour free drift trajectory.
Copy that, Houston. Thank you.
Hey, while I have you, can I ask for some help for troubleshooting monitor 3 in the lab?
I'm standing right by it. Go ahead.
Okay, we're looking for some words, if you could tell us.
And so while the crew does some cleanup work now, Dragon outside of the approach ellipsoid, so we are done with this morning's operations. Again, that release from the Canadarm2 ground commanded for the first time came right on time at 3:58 a.m. Central Time, 4:58 a.m. Eastern Time, with Dragon free drifting close to the arm while it backed away, executing all of its departure burns, now out of the approach ellipsoid and well on its way towards a re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere. Again, that deorbit burn is scheduled to come at 8:43 a.m. Central Time, 9:43 a.m. Eastern, all setting up for an eventual splashdown in the Pacific Ocean at 9:36 a.m. Central, 10:36 a.m. Eastern. We won't be able to televise that splashdown, but tune in to social media channels from both NASA and SpaceX to see pictures as SpaceX's 13th resupply mission to the International Space Station comes to a close. So thanks for staying up late or waking up early and tuning in this morning to say farewell to Dragon. We do appreciate it and hope you enjoyed your time here. As always, you can follow us on the various social media channels to keep up with everything Space Station on the World Wide Web. But with that, a very successful operation. Farewell to Dragon, and all of that setting up for a splashdown soon. So thanks again. We're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. This is Mission Control Houston.